Let's go ahead and get started with this Maxable webinar. Thank you all so much for spending some of your morning with us this beautiful Thursday, wherever you're dialing in from. We started Maxable, a partner of mine, Caitlin, started Maxable about 5 years ago to help homeowners maximize their properties, which is often their greatest asset. And so we focus specifically on accessory dwelling units. And here we are providing a webinar. The webinar title is Balancing Cost and Quality in ADU Construction. And so just a quick note, I'm the CEO of Maxable. My name's Gabe. I have an ADU in my backyard right here. I love it. It provides rental income, but develop relationships with several of the renters who've sort of been in and out and developed some great friendships there. So I really just believe that ADUs are fundamental to solving America's housing crisis. And they're also really beneficial on the individual level. It's not just large developers who get to sort of benefit from this housing type, but really individual homeowners. So that's what gets me going in the morning. That's why I'm so excited to be CEO of Maxable. So that's a little bit about me, but more importantly for this webinar and why so many of you have tuned in today, it's because I'm joined here by Greg Popovich. So Greg Popovich is one of the founders, the original founders of Gold Bar Builders, a wonderful partner to Maxable and a venerated sort of ADU design build company in the Bay Area. Through mostly Gold Bar, Greg has built over 75 accessory dwelling units. So he's worked with clients and he's going to tell us about a wide variety of projects, but really 75 projects is a whole bunch where you've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and you've completed ADUs through the whole time. And I will note now Greg has founded an ADU specific company called ADU for Life, and with that it's right in the title of their company, ADU for Life. So through that, Greg is going to focus completely on ADUs, which is wonderful. He's also the mastermind behind this ADU that you see on the screen right now. Maxable actually did an ADU tour on this. And Sadie, if you could post in the chat room, maybe the link to that YouTube, so people can bookmark it for after if you're curious. But that I believe has over 42,000 views on YouTube. This tour of one of Greg's ADUs. So Greg, it's my pleasure to get to speak with you today. I'd love to open up the floor to you to introduce yourself a little bit above and beyond what I've said. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with all these homeowners and attendees today.
Well, Gabe, I want to thank you and everybody at Maxable for inviting me today. And what we've done is created a company, ADU for Life, which is you can find at aduforlife.com, to exclusively focus on ADUs and the benefits of ADU ownership and how we can sit there and help homeowners to realize their dream. So many homeowners start the process not knowing all the ins and outs from the cities and the counties and get stuck halfway through the process or discouraged. And so that's why we're here, is to help. Once somebody calls us or contacts us, we're able to help navigate the systems with them and help with all the frustrations and all the different roadblocks that they've encountered dealing with the permitting or design or building phases of their project.
And Greg, how did you originally get into ADUs? Do you remember what year you sort of either built your first one through Gold Bar or were first even exposed to the idea? I'm just curious to dig back a little bit.
Well, the interesting thing, Gabe, is that in 2016, I was sitting there wondering, I've had a fairly successful career in construction and development and building different things, investing. And we've done commercial, residential, we've done industrial, we've done hotels, motels, strip centers, things like that, as well as custom homes and speculation homes. In 2016, I decided I wanted to do something to give back instead of just working for the larger audience. I wanted to work for the people in the housing crisis that was going on. So I heard about this thing called ADUs. And so I actually started going up and talking to Senator Wachowski's office, who authored SB 13 back in the 2016, which actually took effect in 2017. Went up there and met with staff and helped give some input on the legislation. Actually did a podcast with Senator Wachowski. We built for one of the planning commissioners in Santa Clara, and she invited me to do a podcast with Senator Wachowski at one time. And it just blossomed from there, and it created a company that now is very trustworthy, very versed in what we do. And so it started back in 2016, even prior to the ADU boom.
Awesome. Yeah, you were in early on this boom, which has become, certainly California has been sort of because of the statewide legislation and the sort of the pinnacle of the housing crisis in terms of prices. California has really led the way, almost by necessity, in ADUs. But now from, on the whole West Coast, from Washington and Oregon, all the way through the middle of the country with Colorado and Texas, all the way to a bunch of different states and municipalities on the East Coast. We're really seeing this become a national movement. So you were in sort of early, and you've built a bunch of ADUs, and therefore I think you've got, I know that you have the credibility to help all these webinar attendees today understand some of the trade-offs in cost and quality. So hopefully that gives everybody a good sense of sort of who Greg is and where he's coming from when he shares a lot of the wisdom, and I asked him a bunch of questions today. Just to back out a little bit, we're going to do about 30 minutes of dialogue here that hopefully should be helpful to all and on topic. I'm going to share a little bit about Maxable, and then we're going to dive into some questions and answers. So thank you to the webinar attendees here who have submitted questions in advance. But I also, even listening to this content is probably going to spur a lot more questions. And so some of them will be answered certainly by Greg and maybe by myself and my colleagues at Maxable. But feel free to use the Q&A feature here in the Zoom webinar. Get your questions in there, and we'll either answer them while we're speaking here or in the Q&A section. So with that said, I do have that ADU you see right there in the background there that we do have that video on. This is the interior. Greg and his team have built this. This is in Los Altos, 800 square foot ADU with a 2-bed, 1-bath. And this ADU was built for elderly parents. So it's got a very senior friendly design, but with a no threshold shower. I guess we're not showing it quite. Oh, we're sort of showing it in the bathroom there behind the door, but also a ramp at the entrance. So this is just a good example. Obviously, it's gone a bit viral on our YouTube because it's well designed for the use case that it was intended for. Greg, anything you want to say? Do you remember this build? I forget which year you completed.
Absolutely. This was a fun build. It was for a 94-year-old gentleman and his 87-year-old wife. And they just enjoyed the construction process, watching. They came and they're there almost every day and just enjoyed the process wonderfully. They loved everything about the ADU and have been living there ever since. So it was a very fun build, very incredibly nice people. And Gabe, that's so important to a builder, is to have people that are nice, supportive, and understand that not every time everything goes as smoothly as you want. So once a roadblock or bump happened, they just go, "Hey, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, we're going to fix it, and this is how we'll do it." So they were just very supportive, wonderful people, loved the ADU, did a beautiful job of landscaping it. And it's just a showcase. It really was nice. Fantastic.
So let's dive into some of what we're here to talk about today. So we put together this. This is certainly not something that Maxable's invented, nor Greg. This idea that there are some levers when you build anything. I mean, it's not just sort of building ADUs. When you build anything, some of those levers are in quality, in cost, and in time. And if you really ramp up one, you've got trade-offs that you make on the others. So first, Greg, maybe you could talk a little bit about quality. Because that's one that you're certainly known for keeping a high bar on quality and not sacrificing that. But I wonder if we could touch briefly on this one, and then we'll focus mostly on trade-offs and sort of the nuances when you think about cost of building an ADU through design and construction, and time through design and construction. So that's where we'll focus mostly, but maybe you can touch first on quality.
Okay, thank you, Gabe. Quality in an ADU, it's very important. And what you need is a builder who will take a look at things and start to notice things. And the picture you see on screen right now, we did not build that ADU. The builder that built it, I'm sure, has built many, many ADUs. There's a few things that I may have done a little bit different. If you'll notice around the fascia board on the ADU, you'll see all the nails sticking out and things like that. Those holes should be puttied up, should be made to look nice to where you don't even notice them. They should just disappear within the framework. Other things along the line of quality is that you can have a nice quality ADU and keep the cost fairly under control as long as you have a good quality builder, again, that has utilized and vetted products that they have found to be affordable but of high quality, that they can buy in volume and able to keep the costs down for the people. So cost and quality don't necessarily go hand in hand sometimes, because you can absolutely get quality for a less cost if you have the right avenues.
Yeah, sort of high value items, right? That makes a lot of sense. Now let's turn to, so thanks for that tangible example of quality. And I think it's important for homeowners to know, we've worked with hundreds of homeowners at Maxable, and while some of us homeowners have a background in construction, most of us don't. And so noticing those little things that really mark a certain bar of quality, like you mentioned, the nails in the fascia board there, and I'm sure there are countless other examples. That's when experience really matters for both, who you decide to help design your ADU, and whether it's the same firm or different firm, who actually builds your ADU. You want them to have an eye for this level of sort of detail and quality details. So moving over to cost, Greg, you are you built these companies, and ADU for Life is based in the Bay Area. So I just want to caveat that or mention that for everybody on this webinar. We asked where people were from, and the majority were from California, as expected, just because of Maxable's sort of audience and reach. But we did have folks from all over the country. So let's focus in based on the Bay Area, but with the caveat for homeowners that your local environment may be different here. The numbers that Greg is referencing, et cetera, are specific to the Bay Area, and I think especially sort of coastal California. Probably pretty applicable for San Diego and Los Angeles as well. But let's just start on cost. So Greg, what is the least expensive ADU all the way to maybe the most expensive ADU? Let's give people a ballpark of sort of what we're talking about when it comes to cost, and we can start to talk about averages and trade-offs.
Construction costs have varied incredibly over just the past year, Gabe, and with inflation as well as the supply chain, it's really put a damper on what's available, who's available, and how to do that. The labor market and labor pool has just somewhat disappeared. So there's a number of ADU builders out there right now that are just taking on job after job after job, but I'm not quite sure where they're going to obtain their labor from. Number one, labor's become very expensive and very scarce. So cost of ADUs has been rising significantly as the plumbers, electricians, framers, foundation people, cost of goods like concrete, cost of roofing materials, with being part petrol products when you're using composition roof, has just gone very, very high. In the Bay Area, you're looking anywhere at a very low of around $400 a square foot, and it can go all the way up. We've seen them over $1,000. I haven't built one over $1,000, and I don't intend on doing that. We focus mostly in the $400 to $600 square foot range, and that's where I enjoy the homeowners the most. But you can get into some very, very costly builds, hillside builds, where you need to drill 18. We just did one that we ended up drilling 18 feet down in order to do piers on a hillside. And those can be incredibly costly. But typical ADUs, when you have a slab on grade, something nice and level, do a standard design, you're looking in the lower ballpark. Once you start adding custom features, the sky's the limit, and you can well exceed $1,000 a foot if you decide that you want a full-blown custom ADU?
So, so dollar per square foot is an interesting way to measure cost for ADU. It's obviously pretty typical in the building industry to reference cost per square foot. But for the average homeowner out there, or for many homeowners, let's just break that into actual sort of total cost. How much you actually have to finance or have in cash to be able to successfully build an ADU. So for if you take your $400 a square foot, and we think about an ADU, a lot of ADUs we see are in the 600, 700, maybe up to 750 square feet. They're above 750 square feet in the state of California. You have to start paying impact fees. So a lot of people tend to keep it right in that like leading right up to 750 square foot range. But let's just say for a 600 square foot home, ADU, that at $400 a square foot, I believe that would be $250,000 for just the construction piece of this. And then obviously and we'll talk about some of the next slides. Greg will go into detail on some of the considerations that really rise, maybe take from those base, cost per square foot and really rise up. So we'll talk about roofing and insulation and cabinetry and details like that. So that's kind of the low end, and I'll just augment sort of from Maxable and what we see in California, especially these three areas. There are some garage conversions specifically, depending on the work that needs to get done, that can come in sometimes significantly under that 250-ish. It's rare that we see anything done successfully for under 100,000, no matter what the scope is. By the time you get through permitting, by the time you get through utilities, by the time you get through any structural upkeep to do, and not to mention all the interior finishes, etc. Very rare. If that's your aspiration as a homeowner, especially in the state of California, you're probably going to have to revise your budget. It's probably unrealistic unless you've really got something that's basically ready to go and just needs to be permitted and kept up a little bit. And then we see a few projects in the 150 to 200 range, mostly garage conversions. Rare to see a new build in that range. And then, as Greg alluded to there, lower end of sort of in the 200,000s, and then we see plenty of projects in the 3s and 4s. So hopefully that gives us a realistic sense for the homeowners out there. And I think some people totally get that and they understand where that's coming from. Other folks maybe don't have a real grasp on the idea that you're building all elements of a home into a small square footage. You still need a bathroom, you still need a kitchen, you still need, framing, you still need foundation, you still need utilities. This isn't as simple as sort of renovating an existing space. So that's cost. Now, Greg, I'd love to turn it over for you to talk a little bit about timeline as well. If a homeowner's maybe first, what have you seen in all of your 75 projects in terms of the shortest and the longest timeframes for construction? But also just address that homeowner who's hasn't got it started on the design phase yet. What's a realistic expectation for them in terms of time to get that certificate of occupancy and have a finished ADU?
Well, thanks, Gabe. To start with on the design phase, that really depends a lot on the homeowner. What we do when we design an ADU for a homeowner is we ask, first of all, give me your wish list. Let me take a look at your wish list, see what you have, and then we'll sit there and take what they've told us, design a floor plan around that. If the homeowner decides very rapidly that, yeah, that's it, which happens quite often, then we're able to go immediately into the drafting phase and to do the construction drawings. So that could be as short as 30 days. I've seen it as long as 6 months, and that's from homeowners who can't really make up their mind or like something and then want it changed again. Because when you change a set of plans, you're not just changing one sheet, you're changing multiple sheets of the plan set. So it goes into all sorts of different caveats at that point. The one thing that homeowners really need to be aware of is that any small change, small or large change in an ADU will have an equal and opposite effect somewhere else in that ADU. So if they all of a sudden say, well, I want an entry closet. Well, where are you willing to give up space? Are you willing to give up space in your bedroom closet? Are you willing to give up space in the kitchen? So every single decision has an equal or opposite reaction to it that will affect the ADU in certain ways. So the timing on design is really, a lot of it goes to the homeowner and how fast they can make decisions, and how fast they can get in the queue for design. As far as permitting, in the beginning, it was like the Wild West. Nobody knew what they were doing in any of the cities or counties. And it was going, in some instances, some counties, some cities were trying to hit the 60-day mark. Back in the beginning, it was 120 days is what they had, and that would be fairly common. And you'd also see it at 120 or 180, 200 days, depending on whatever the city felt at that time, because it pretty much the statutes weren't really being enforced, and the movement wasn't quite established back then. Now the cities and counties are really trying hard to meet those 60-day deadlines that are by statute what they have to approve an ADU. The issue comes in when you have, I'll give you a good example. In Los Altos, we had the fire department come in and say, well, the cul-de-sac is too small, so you're going to have to build a new cul-de-sac. And our response was, we're not building a new road for you. We're building an ADU, which is supposed to be an affordable housing. So what we did is we actually went out with a video camera, rented a truck, same size as a fire truck, and had to videotape going through that cul-de-sac and showing that we could turn that vehicle around with vehicles in the cul-de-sac. And then finally, after going through that, that was probably about a 30-day process to get the fire department to even look at what we were doing. Once they looked at it, they said, okay, we get it, we see it. There's 20 plus cul-de-sacs in the area that are the same size. We can't shut you down. So it ended up working that way. So that was a time crunch. So there's things that will come up during the permitting process that will sit there and could stall the project. Once you're in the queue for build and we step foot on your land, we only build stick-built ADUs. We don't build modulars, and we don't build roll-ins. So what we do once we're on site, the fastest we've ever done was 62 days from start to finish. That was pre-COVID. And since COVID, we're anywhere between 120 and 150 days on average to build from the time we step on site to have the ADU built and complete to where you can move in. So things have really changed just over, since COVID, basically, with labor, with costs, with everything else, and supply chain, which is really difficult. If someone wants to buy appliances, let's say, Gabe, that aren't available, but they have their eye on a specific wolf range or something that's custom that you need to wait for, that will delay the whole project, because that delays every single subcontractor that's going in there. Every single design, one of our teams relies on product being there on time when we want it. And then that way we're able to get in and out of your backyard a lot faster.
Awesome, Greg. So it sounds like there's maybe three phases. One is like design phase, where you're really figuring out exactly what you want. There's a lot to that, and hiring an experienced ADU specific designer, whether part of a design build firm or just an architecture or design firm that has experience with ADUs and interacting with your local sort of planning and zoning and building department. So important. That phase can be anywhere from a month to maybe 6 months, or we've even seen it drag on for more. And a lot of that's up to the pace of the homeowner on making decisions, et cetera. Then there's that second phase, permitting, and municipalities, especially in California, are getting faster at this, which is great. But that can still take 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And sometimes we've seen it drag on for longer, depending on revisions. Then you said for building, and you're specific for building sort of stick built, not prefab or roll in or modular. You said 62 days, so 2 months, to 150 days being a more typical now, 62 being almost an anomaly, pre-COVID anomaly. So
I was so happy that day, Gabe. The day that we gave those keys to the homeowner, I could never in my wildest dreams imagine building a from ground up in 62 days. Our teams are awesome.
It's really tight.
But it's not going to happen again.
So for a homeowner who's just coming new to the process, I think that adding these up I think the fastest you could ever expect in this day and age to build a stick built from idea through finished would be roughly 8 to 12 months, and then the slowest, or the slowest while still expediently moving along and paying the bills when they're due, etc., might be closer to 18 months, 2 years. So somewhere in that range, 1 to 2 years is probably a good sense for when you go from idea all the way through finished project. Is that a fair characterization?
Average 8 to 12 months is what we're doing. When you're getting in the 2-year range, that's when you're dealing with strictly custom, and a lot of that would be up to the homeowner changing their mind over and over again.
Yep, makes sense. Awesome. I'd love to dive into a few examples. One thing that we really stress to a lot of homeowners through our YouTube channels, et cetera, at Maxable is, the decisions made in the design phase really affect the construction phase, right? Even though design phase is faster, it doesn't cost as much, what you decide to do there. So we've got this particular case study where homeowner had designs done by an architect. The design looked good, but once that homeowner actually started collecting bids from general contractors, that complicated roof line, the way the roof sat on top of that ADU, added an additional $30,000 versus a more traditional roof. Greg, do you have any other sort of anecdotes along these lines where you've had to change things up? I'm sure you do. Let's hear an anecdote or two for when you've had to sort of change things up, or maybe you could touch a little bit on sort of value engineering and what that concept is.
What we do is we try to get involved with the designer or architect ahead of time. Once that it's done and designed, it gets approved. It gets a lot harder because you're dealing with revisions. So when we're able to work with a designer or architect, able to sit there and point out certain things that will help save the homeowner money, if that's their goal. If it's strictly to have an architect design from an artist's point of view and cost is not an issue, obviously that's something that can be done as well. But there's a number of items that go into ADUs that need to be done in order to be cost effective. There's a lot of people want windows. Part of that problem is Title 24. So you design it the way they want it. Title 24 comes back, which is the California energy mandate that you have to go by, that says that you can't do this because you'll have to do this, and to mitigate this you'll have to do that, and by the time you're done the costs are so excessive that you can't do it. Some people, like one of the clients we did, had they're called bifold windows, but it's actually a trifold, and it opens up to where it's wide open to the outside. That added an extra $18,000 to the project just for that one window. So architects like to design those in because they look absolutely stunning. It's just sometimes we need to sit there and keep budget in mind in order to sit there and to make sure that the homeowner is going to get what they want and the same type of look of what they want.
So I wonder what you do, Greg, when a homeowner comes to you with an unrealistic budget. Often I would say that would be too low.
When I've turned down a lot of ADUs lately where the homeowners are looking at costs in Seattle or in Oregon or in different areas of the country to where the costs are significantly lower, and they get an unrealistic. Part of the important thing is communication about your budget early with someone, so that I'm not spinning your wheels and you're not spinning mine. And what I mean by that is, if you want to spend $200,000 for an ADU, but you want 800 square foot, and you want custom windows, custom doors, gold-plated fixtures, et cetera, it's just not going to be able to be done. So if you're able to communicate your budget with me ahead of time, it's not a trick question of how much do you have to spend. It's a question of how much do you have to spend so we can design this to where it fits within your budget. If you can be honest with me up ADU you can ever imagine with that information, but without communicating to your builder ahead of time your budget, it really puts everybody at a disadvantage, including the homeowner. So it's just very important to communicate that budget ahead of time in order to get what you want. And the builders, a good quality design firm or a good quality builder will give you ideas on how to get a similar look for a lot less money and be able to help along those lines. So budget is critical, and just critical to communicate. And then that
Yeah, Patty Rodriguez just mentioned that Greg's sound is going out sometimes. I'm not sure why that is, Greg. We caught, I'd say 95% of what you said there. There was just one or two pauses. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that mid webinar, Patty, but I'm also seeing that. So now that we're really talking about communicating budget and that it's not a trick question, I think that's actually really a key. A lot of homeowners who come to Maxable, want coaching on how to talk with general contractors about budget, because, is it a game? Should I give my realistic number? Should I try to get them lower because I know it's going to go over? So Maxable has resources to help you think through that. But in general, what you want to do is you want to find someone and find a builder that you can trust well enough to have realistic and pragmatic discussions about budget and cost. And, say, we should target 300 because I know, things often change. I can spend a little bit more than that, but we should be really targeting 300 for this. And then we can, you can work with that designer, that builder, et cetera, to work backwards from that budget. And if you're worried about, just keep in mind, and this is lost on homeowners sometimes, if you perhaps sort of don't trust or feel misaligned with a builder at the earliest phases, this is someone who, they and their crew are going to be on your property for months at a time, or for months. And so developing that communication, developing that trust early on is so important. And finding someone that you jive with and can have these realistic conversations about cost and timeline with is makes your life as a homeowner who maybe hasn't done a lot of development or any at all a lot easier. So with that said, Greg, what is the best timing and method for discussing budget with a contractor? Can you just touch on whether homeowners should be seeking multiple bids, sort of talking to different general contractors, as well as any advice you have on timing?
Talking to multiple general contractors, I've always thought was a good idea. The people that about 90% of who we work with are referral clients. And so it just works out real well for us. So sometimes, but what it does for me is it builds the trust with the client. And the trust that you were just talking about, Gabe, is so incredibly important because I'm choosing the client as much as the client's choosing me now. And it's one of these things to where if I get a feeling that the client's not trusting us, I can't work with that client. Most of the problems in construction are when a contractor will talk to a client and the client doesn't trust the contractor. So they don't believe what they're saying. On the flip side of that, if the client's not being forthright, the builder's going, they're saying they can't afford this, yet they're saying that they can afford it or they want it, and it's a non-negotiable. So if the communication's true and honest up front, definitely do it and talk to people and see, who do you have a good relationship with? You might not have the same relationship with your contractor that someone else did because of personalities. The contractor 100%. Otherwise, you will have the process will not be good. Gabe, you're so right. The worst part about building an ADU is you got your construction crew in your backyard for 4 to 5 months, and that doesn't matter if it's stick built or if it's a modular home or it just doesn't matter. They're going to be there and they're going to be in your backyard, and you have to have a good relationship to say, hey, whoa, the guy showed up at 6:30 today. I can't have him here till 7. Oh, okay. We'll make sure that happens that way. And you need to have that type of dialogue and communication with your contractors. So definitely take the time, find out, who's reputable in your area, who's built a number of ADUs, who knows the city who knows the counties, who's worked with legislation, who's worked with ordinances. The city and county ordinances are they're just incredible to navigate sometimes. So make sure somebody's got a lot of experience in the ADU realm, because it took me a long time to learn it, and it is completely different from general construction.
And this is really the core of why we started Maxable, was, to provide education like this webinar, like all of our YouTube content, blog content, to homeowners who maybe haven't done this quite a bit, or as free developer does. And then also on the flip side, maintain a list and sort of references for vetted designers and contractors, so that if you aren't one of the lucky homeowners who maybe has a contractor that just built your neighbor's ADU and is perfect for you, if you're not in that lucky situation where you have built-in trust and you do need some other option, and even if you do have that, you want to get bids from multiple, etc. Maxable is a great way. We vet contractors. We make sure that they that they operate with high ethics and transparency, or else we stop referring them, of course. And so that is one of the core reasons that we started Maxable, was just to create this level of sort of transparency and vetting that you're talking about. I'm going to skip a little bit here just because I do want to leave enough room for Q&A at the end. But I'm wondering, Greg, if we can talk just some more rapid fire around some of the actual, like, getting into the meat of when you're thinking about building an ADU, the cost and time trade-offs of different sort of these different aspects. So maybe first we can touch on roofs.
Roofs. The thing that I notice a lot is that architects love to have what's called a cut and stack roof, which is the roof that you see on your right. What we like to do when we build is we use what's called pre-manufactured trusses, which are engineered in the factory that builds them. The factories are usually small. It's not something like a giant factory building trusses. It's not, and they don't just pump them out. So there's actually an engineer involved. The trusses are engineered. What happens is it saves a huge amount of time, and time is money and labor and everything else. So the pre-engineered trusses, you take them, they show up, you roll them. It takes us less than a day to sit there and to roll all the trusses. And usually by that time, we're done sheeting the roof. So it's very important that, or a time saving and cost saving fashion to go and do a engineered truss system versus a hand stacked truss system. You can still get your vaulted roofs. You can still get you can still do the majority of the things you can do with a hand stacked roof with the engineered truss roofing.
Awesome.
And cost savings.
Yeah, great insight. What about insulation?
Insulation, I've seen a lot of what's called spray foam insulation being incorporated into a number of architects' designs now. Number one, it's very hard to get. Number two, it's very expensive. Number three, the wait time is huge. When you have rolled insulation, it works just as well. There's certain applications where it will not work if you have open beam ceilings, things like that you need to, or small cavities that you can't do. But in the majority of instances, rolled fiberglass insulation is equally as effective as spray foam insulation, but at a much less cost, and it's a time saver as well.
Awesome. What about foundations?
On foundations, you'll see on the right-hand side, that's a raised foundation. In the old days, raised foundations were the gold standard. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is that you had copper piping and all the piping ran through the foundation. So what would happen in the old days, if you had a slab foundation and you had a leak, you'd be jackhammering and ripping up the foundation and going. So a lot of people wanted to have all that piping underneath and have access to it and things like that. In modern times, we use what's called PEX, and PEX is now the industry standard in plumbing, which goes up through the attic. When you have a slab foundation now, the only plumbing is non-pressurized plumbing. You'll have the waste disposal in there. So there's no real chances of having a real problem. So a slab foundation you'll see is a one pour, it's a unipore, versus when you have a raised foundation, because you're going to still be pouring a perimeter foundation. Then you're going to be building another foundation. Then you're going to be putting a subfloor, and then you're going to be rolling joists. It adds to the number of inspections, which equals time. It adds to the cost because of all the wood and all the different avenues, the labor, and everything else that goes into it. So be careful if anybody ever quotes you and says, oh, we can do a raised foundation for the same cost. It's significantly more cost without much of, if any, benefit.
Awesome, great insight. What about cabinets?
Cabinets, any type of custom cabinetry will cost you significantly more than pre-manufactured cabinetry. We went through 3 different manufacturers and found what we consider the best in pre-manufactured cabinetry. And you'll see that on the left. On the right, you'll see custom cabinetry. You can't see a lot of difference, and you'll never notice a lot of difference. If you have a good quality pre-manufactured cabinet, they're still going to have the plywood bases. They're still going to be built almost identical to custom cabinetry. They just happen to be built in a factory and are installed modularly versus something coming in custom, which you'll come and have to have a custom installer come and install it, which equals time, which equals money, which equals labor. So the difference between pre-manufactured cabinets and custom anything is a huge amount of time, labor, and basically cost.
Awesome. And so, Greg, thanks for walking us through some of the specifics when it comes to those different areas where cost and time trade-offs are, the more you know as a homeowner, the more you can get ahead of some of these potential pitfalls that we see so often with all the homeowners building ADUs these days. So one of the things that a lot of people ask, and we do run a different webinar series. If you go to our website, you can find that. But how do I vet and find knowledgeable teams, people like Greg, to help build my ADU? And so Maxable is your partner in that effort. Our network is built out most strongly in California, but we've got plans and ambitions to serve the rest of the country, to sort of grow gradually to serve the rest of the country. We understand the importance of hiring the right team. It's the #1 thing you can do to be successful in your ADU project and to avoid a lot of headaches. And so Maxable offers obviously a lot of YouTube, free webinars, blog posts. Subscribe to our newsletter, follow along, get yourself educated on ADUs. And then a very special thanks to Greg. Greg, you are super knowledgeable. You're super knowledgeable about, with what you do. You have treated every Maxable client that we've been lucky enough to send your way with respect. The people that you've partnered with to build ADUs in their backyards are thrilled with your work. You are and will be tremendously successful with ADU for life. And we thank you deeply from Maxable for joining us on this webinar.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you all to everybody who joined today, and feel free to be in touch with Maxable. I wish you the best of luck as you design, plan, build, and then live in or rent out your ADUs.